"You don't belong here," said Professor Helena Cardoso, pointing toward the door in front of 300 students at the most expensive private school in New York City. The 12-year-old daughter of a janitor lifted her eyes and did something that silenced the entire room forever. The International Elite Academy occupied an entire city block on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Tuition, $8,000 a month. Imported uniforms worth $1,200 each. Tennis courts with Olympic-grade flooring and science labs that cost more than most apartments. It was a Tuesday in September, and the main auditorium buzzed with the city's elite, gathered for the school's annual science fair. 300 children sat in Italian leather seats, each one dressed in pristine uniforms, navy blazers embroidered with golden crests, silk ties, and polished English shoes that gleamed like mirrors. Along the marble corridors, footsteps echoed with the solemnity of a cathedral built on money. Sophia Martinez stood out like a stain against perfection. Her uniform, though identical in model, had been bought secondhand at the school's thrift outlet. The blazer was faded at the sleeves, the tie had a tiny poorly sewn tear, and her shoes, though carefully polished, bore the marks of long use. She sat in the last row, as always. Not by choice, but because the other students naturally kept their distance from the scholarship girl. For 4 years she had occupied that invisible place, observing from afar the world of privilege that surrounded her, but never included her. At that very moment, Sophia's mother, Rosa Martinez, was cleaning the bathrooms on the second floor. She had arrived at 5 in the morning, as she did every day for the past 6 years, making sure every piece of marble shone before the first students arrived. 16 hours of work every day, split among that school and 2 others, just to cover the $300 in monthly expenses left after her daughter's scholarship. The auditorium was packed with business moguls, socialite mothers, and teachers with international resumes. They had all come to witness the annual competition that awarded $50,000 in university scholarships to the best science project. A sum that, for those families, was the price of a weekend trip, but for Sophia represented her only real chance at a different future. The lights dimmed. The murmurs stopped. Professor Helena stepped onto the stage. Dr. Helena Cardoso adjusted her designer glasses and walked to the center of the stage with the poise of someone who commanded academic empires. At 45, she boasted a resume that would impress any university in the world. A PhD in education from Harvard, postdoctoral studies at Cambridge, keynote speaker at international conferences. Her monthly salary of $25,000 was just a fraction of what she made consulting for governments and multinational corporations. To her, those 300 students represented more than learners. They were the future of America's elite, and she saw herself as the architect of their formation. Helena held a personal theory about elite education. Only those born into wealth possessed the cultural sophistication needed to thrive in high-level environments. Scholarship students were systemic accidents, political concessions that diluted the purity of academia. She tolerated their presence the way one tolerates a stain on an expensive painting. In the last row, Sophia Martinez sat up straight, despite the tension weighing down her shoulders. At 12, her eyes already carried a maturity far beyond her age. She had learned early how to read the unspoken rules of that world, where to sit to avoid notice, how to speak so as not to sound ignorant, when to remain silent to hide her origins. Her brown hair was tied back in a plain ponytail, without the French accessories her classmates wore. Her nails, cut short and clean, had never seen the inside of the manicure salons frequented by the other girls. The auditorium buzzed with conversations in multiple languages. Parents closing business deals while waiting for the presentations. Mothers planning trips to summer homes in Europe. Executives answering emails from Singapore and New York. Each family there managed fortunes larger than the GDP of entire towns. The icy air conditioning mixed with imported perfumes and a luxurious cocktail worth more than some people's yearly salaries. Principal Robert Sampaio watched nervously from the corner of the stage, as he always did when parents gathered. He knew that any slip could cost the school millions in donations, or worse, the transfer of students to rival institutions. The annual science competition was his greatest source of both pride and fear. $50,000 in prizes sponsored by parents, projects that rivaled university research, and the ever-present pressure to uphold the school's prestige. Sophia felt the weight of 300 eyes that never truly saw her. To them, she was a necessary ghost, a social concession that allowed the school to claim inclusivity without ever changing its essence. But that day, for the first time in 4 years, she had a project to present. A project born of sleepless nights of research, weekends spent at the public library, and every dollar she'd saved selling homemade brownies outside the school gates. Professor Helena scanned the list of presentations, pausing deliberately at the last name, Sophia Martinez. The surname struck like a discordant note in a symphony of names that echoed power and tradition. She knew the girl well, the janitor's daughter, the scholarship student who occupied a place that should have belonged to someone more appropriate for such an environment. For 4 years, she had watched Sophia move along the school's margins like a shadow, always present but never truly part of that world. Our next presenter, Helena announced with a smile that never reached her eyes, is Sophia Martinez. The name echoed through the auditorium with a subtle undertone of disapproval. Some families whispered among themselves, recognizing the surname of the woman who parked their cars in the school garage. Others simply had no idea who the girl was, a testament to how invisible she had remained all those years. Sophia rose slowly, feeling 300 pairs of eyes converge on her like spotlights on a stage she had never rehearsed for. Her steps down the central aisle sounded louder than those of the other presenters, each movement amplified by the collective attention. Families watched her with the morbid curiosity of onlookers at a looming accident, waiting for the moment when the class divide would become painfully obvious. Before we begin, Helena interrupted as Sophia reached the stage. I'd like to give our distinguished audience some context about our presenter. She circled the girl like a predator sizing up its prey. Sophia is here on a full scholarship. Her mother, Rosa Martinez, has worked here for 6 years as part of the cleaning staff. I'm sure many of you have seen her in the hallways. A ripple of discomfort spread through the auditorium. Some parents exchanged knowing glances, finally placing the girl in the context they understood. Helena continued with the surgical precision of someone who knew exactly where to cut deepest. It's admirable, of course, that we provide opportunities for underprivileged children, but we must be realistic about expectations. After all, family environment and cultural background are determining factors in academic development. Sophia kept her eyes on the floor, feeling each word like a public slap. At 12, she'd already built defenses against everyday humiliations, but she had never endured a public execution before 300 people. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the notes of her project, 4 months of intense work reduced to pages that now seemed pathetic before that audience of financial titans. The silence that followed was sharp as shattered glass. Helena knew she had planted doubt in the audience's minds, and now it was time to reap the fruits of humiliation. She walked to the center of the stage with the confidence of someone who controlled the entire situation, each step calculated for maximum dramatic effect. She had a reputation to uphold, a Harvard PhD to honor, and she would not allow a girl of questionable background to tarnish the solemnity of the event with a mediocre presentation. "In fact," Helena said, stopping directly in front of Sophia and locking eyes with the girl with a coldness that made the entire room hold its breath, "why don't we make this a little more interesting for our distinguished audience?" Her voice took on a theatrical tone, as if announcing a show. "I'll make a proposal to young Sophia. If she can genuinely impress this audience of experts, parents, and educators with a truly relevant contribution, I will personally pay her tuition for an entire year." A murmur of surprise swept the auditorium. $96,000. The figure echoed in everyone's minds like silent thunder. For the families seated there, it was the price of a luxury car or an extended vacation in Europe. For Sophia, it was an astronomical sum her family could never gather in decades of honest work. Helena knew exactly the weight of what she was offering and smiled with the cruelty of someone playing with marked cards. "But," she continued, raising a finger to dramatize the condition, "when she fails to present anything even remotely relevant to this level of academic excellence, she will agree to leave this school today. No drama, no appeals, no second chances." She activated the digital timer on the giant screen behind the stage. Exactly 5 minutes for her presentation. Enough time for anyone truly prepared to prove their competence. The audience stirred at the elegant cruelty of the proposal. Some parents discreetly reached for their phones, sensing they were about to witness something memorable. Others whispered, speculating about the fate of the girl who had suddenly become the afternoon's entertainment. Principal Robert tried to intervene, but Helena silenced him with a look that promised professional consequences if he dared to interrupt her social experiment. Sophia looked at the digital timer flashing 5 minutes, 0 seconds. The red numbers pulsed like a racing heartbeat, reminding her that 300 witnesses awaited her fall. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and when she opened them again, something had changed. Silent determination replaced fear, a timeless dignity her mother had planted in her soul through years of daily example. Sophia walked to the projector with steps that seemed to echo in slow motion, every movement watched by 300 people waiting for her imminent fall. Her hands trembled slightly as she connected her flash drive to the equipment, a simple device she had bought at a downtown electronics store with the money she saved from selling homemade brownies for 3 months. The contrast was stark. Around her, state-of-the-art technology worth more than luxury cars, and there she was with her modest but functional device. As she waited for the file to load, Sophia let her mind drift back 6 months to when it all began. She remembered the morning she decided to enter the science fair, not out of ambition or vanity, but out of sheer necessity to prove to herself that she belonged there. She had seen the announcement on the school's bulletin board, $50,000 in a college scholarship for the best project. For the first time in 4 years, she felt a spark of genuine hope, not hope of winning, but hope of showing that a scholarship student could also contribute something meaningful. The decision wasn't easy. Sophia knew her mother came home at 11 at night after working 14-hour days across 3 jobs. Rosa cleaned the school from 5 to 10 in the morning, worked at a telemarketing company from 11 to 6, and still cleaned two families' homes on weekends. All this just to cover the $300 left over from the full scholarship, plus food, transportation, school supplies, and the countless hidden costs of an elite education, even one that was free. For months, Sophia had devoted every spare minute to her secret research. While her classmates attended expensive language courses, cultural trips to Europe, and private lessons with renowned tutors, she spent entire afternoons at the New York Public Library, a century-old building where she had free access to academic databases and fast internet. There, among homeless people seeking shelter and underfunded college students, Sophia discovered a world of knowledge her elite school never imagined she could reach. Her project was born from the painful observation of her own reality. Every day on the way between home and school, Sophia crossed three completely different worlds: the working-class neighborhood where she lived, where high electricity bills strained family budgets, downtown, with its sharp contrast between wealth and poverty, and finally the Upper East Side, where each household consumed more electricity in a month than her family could pay for in 6. The disparity disturbed her deeply, and out of that unease came her research on renewable energy applied to low-income communities. The file finally loaded on the screen. Sophia took a deep breath, glanced at Helena, who watched her with a cruel smile of anticipation, then swept her eyes across the auditorium. She saw expectant faces, some amused, others visibly uncomfortable, but all united by the same certainty: she had nothing relevant to offer. The timer read 4 minutes and 55 seconds. In less than 5 minutes, her future would be decided before an audience that saw her only as involuntary entertainment. "My name is Sophia Martinez," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "And today, I will present a project on renewable energy in underserved communities, a sustainable proposal to reduce housing costs in urban peripheries." The complex title echoed through the auditorium like a stone thrown into a still pond, sending ripples of surprise across the audience's faces. Some parents exchanged looks, clearly not expecting such technical terminology from the girl they had just assumed was headed for public failure. The first slide projected onto the giant screen showed a detailed chart of energy consumption across different social classes in New York City. Over 4 months, Sophia had gathered data by personally visiting 50 families in 3 different neighborhoods, always accompanied by her mother on weekends. The numbers were precise, organized with the meticulousness of someone who knew that every decimal could mean the difference between credibility and dismissal. Low-income families spent an average of $520 a month on electricity, 28% of their total income, while wealthy families spent $1,200, a mere 4% of their monthly earnings. Helena watched from the side of the stage, her expression starting to lose its initial confidence. She had expected an amateur presentation, maybe some graphs copied from the internet or superficial data lifted from basic school reports. But the numbers on the screen revealed genuine field research, with a methodology she recognized from academic papers she herself reviewed for international journals. The timer showed 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and Sophia had only just begun. For 6 months, Sophia continued, clicking to the next slide that displayed photographs of improvised solar installations, I studied 23 renewable energy projects implemented in low-income areas of Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, and Belo Horizonte. I discovered that the main barrier is neither technological nor educational, as is often assumed, but economic and bureaucratic. Her language had shifted completely. The words flowed with the precision of someone who mastered technical vocabulary, each term carefully chosen to demonstrate deep knowledge of the subject. A businessman in the third row leaned forward, intrigued by the data. Eduardo Mendez, owner of a sustainability-focused construction company, immediately recognized that the numbers matched his own market research. Information that had cost thousands of dollars to gather through consulting firms. How a 12-year-old girl had managed to access such precise and current data was a mystery that sparked his genuine professional interest. Sophia clicked again, revealing a functional prototype she had built using recyclable materials and basic electronic components. The image showed a perfect miniature of a solar capturing system adapted for uneven rooftops, the kind of precarious construction common in working-class neighborhoods. This prototype, she explained, pointing to the technical details, can be built with an initial investment of $400 per family, generating a monthly savings of $250 on electricity bills. The investment pays for itself in 1 year and 8 months. The whispers in the audience had stopped completely. 300 people were paying genuine attention for the first time since the presentation began. They no longer expected a public disaster. They were starting to realize they were witnessing something unexpectedly serious. Helena felt her grip on the situation slipping away like fine sand through her fingers, and the timer kept counting down relentlessly. 3 minutes and 45 seconds left. Sophia advanced to the next slide, and the transformation was instant. The shy girl who had walked onto the stage 5 minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who commanded her field with surprising authority. To validate the technical feasibility of this proposal, she said, switching to flawless English, I conducted a comparative analysis with similar projects implemented in Bangladesh, Kenya, and rural areas of India. The sudden shift in language produced absolute silence in the auditorium. It wasn't the basic English taught in school classes, but the fluent technical vocabulary of someone who had studied primary international sources. Helena felt the first real blow to her confidence. In 15 years of international academic work, she had developed a keen ear for distinguishing genuine linguistic competence from superficial memorization. What she heard from Sophia was real fluency, perfect pronunciation, correct usage of complex scientific terminology. The professor tried to interrupt, raising her hand to question the presentation, but Principal Robert discreetly gestured for her to wait. He too had noticed that something extraordinary was happening on stage, and his administrative instincts told him that interrupting could have disastrous consequences. Comme nous pouvons observer dans cette recherche française, Sophia continued, seamlessly shifting into French, les communautés rurales en Afrique de l'Ouest ont réduit leurs coûts énergétiques de 72%. She was quoting a study from the Sorbonne University she had found during late nights at the public library. A 120-page paper she had painstakingly translated using technical dictionaries and sheer determination. The audience was stunned. Some parents immediately recognized they were hearing fluent academic French, not memorized phrases from a textbook. An energy sector executive in the second row discreetly pulled out his phone and began recording. Marcus Oliveira had signed contracts in 16 different countries and knew genuine talent when he saw it. In 30 years of career, he had interviewed engineers from the world's best universities, but he had never witnessed such a technically solid presentation from a 12-year-old child. The data Sophia presented matched exactly the research his company had commissioned from international consulting firms, work that had cost them $300,000. Sophia clicked to the next image, showing complex, handwritten mathematical calculations on plain paper. Using the energy efficiency formula developed by MIT in 2022, she explained, pointing to equations that looked like hieroglyphs to most of the audience, we can calculate that a community of 200 families would reduce their annual energy costs by $540,000, freeing resources for food, education, and healthcare. These were numbers she had checked and rechecked dozens of times, knowing a single mathematical error could destroy the credibility of her work. Helena tried again to interrupt, this time rising from her chair and walking toward the stage. Miss Martinez, she said in a formal tone meant to sound intimidating, this information is far too advanced for your age. Could you explain your sources? It was a desperate attempt to question the authenticity of the work, to insinuate that Sophia had copied or been helped by adults. Sophia paused the presentation and looked directly at Helena with a serenity that impressed the entire auditorium. Of course, Professor Cardoso. My main sources include 17 scientific articles from the Journal of Renewable Energy, 8 World Bank studies on sustainable development, 23 technical reports from the International Energy Agency, and 42 interviews I personally conducted with families in 3 different communities in New York. Each source was cited with surgical precision, including page numbers and publication dates she had memorized during months of intensive study. The professor was speechless. Helena had tried to undermine Sophia's credibility, but instead received a list of sources more extensive and up-to-date than many academic papers she herself had reviewed for scientific journals. The timer read 2 minutes and 15 seconds, and Sophia hadn't even reached the most impressive part of her presentation. The girl who didn't belong there was transforming public humiliation into a demonstration of competence that left 300 people spellbound. Sophia resumed the presentation with growing confidence, fueled by the respectful silence that had replaced the earlier scornful whispers. But the real innovation of my project, she said, revealing the next slide with technical diagrams drawn by hand with millimetric precision, lies not only in the technological adaptation but in the financial implementation proposal. The screen displayed a social business model she had developed after studying successful cases in Bangladeshi microfinance and Kenyan community energy programs. It was a complex system that allowed communities themselves to collectively finance the installation of equipment, creating a network of economic and energy sustainability. Helena watched from the side of the stage, her expression shifting from mockery to deep discomfort. As a professor with a PhD in education, she recognized brilliance when she saw it, and she was witnessing something that directly contradicted her theories about cognitive development and social class. For 15 years, she had publicly defended that academic excellence was the product of privileged family environments, expensive educational resources, and sophisticated cultural exposure from early childhood. Sophia was dismantling those convictions with every technical term, every precise calculation, every memorized academic reference. You must be wondering about practical feasibility, Sophia continued, as if reading the thoughts of an audience that had stopped underestimating her completely. She clicked to a series of photographs showing her prototype working in a real house in her neighborhood. For 3 months, I tested this system in the home of my neighbor, Mrs. Carmen, who has 4 children and spends $450 a month on electricity. The images showed improvised but functional solar installations, energy meters recording reduced consumption, and handwritten spreadsheets documenting real savings month by month. Eduardo Mendez, the sustainability entrepreneur, was completely captivated. 30 years of experience told him the numbers Sophia presented were not only accurate, but revolutionary. His company had invested $2 million in research and development to reach similar conclusions, and a 12-year-old girl had achieved the same results with resources totaling less than 1,000. He discreetly took notes on his phone, already envisioning partnership and large-scale implementation opportunities. Sophia moved on to the boldest part of her presentation. Based on these results, I calculated that this school could reduce its operational costs by 40% through the implementation of renewable energy. The figure echoed through the auditorium like thunder. 40% savings in an institution that spent over $2 million annually on energy meant $800,000 in yearly savings, enough to fund 100 additional full scholarships, build new labs, or hire specialized teachers. Principal Robert leaned forward in his chair, suddenly very interested in the financial aspects of the presentation. In 15 years of managing the school, he had searched for ways to cut costs without compromising quality, and Sophia was presenting a solution he had never considered. The calculations on the screen were detailed, showing implementation costs, installation schedules, and savings projections that paid off in 2.5 years. Furthermore, Sophia continued, her voice gaining genuine passion for the subject, the school could become a reference center for sustainability, offering hands-on renewable energy courses to the local community. It was a proposal that went beyond financial savings, transforming the institution into an agent of social change. The girl who had been humiliated for not belonging there was proposing ways to make that place better for everyone. The timer showed 1 minute and 20 seconds, and Sophia still had one last surprise reserved for the audience that had completely underestimated her potential. For her final conclusion, Sophia abandoned the slides entirely and walked to the center of the stage, positioning herself exactly where Helena had tried to humiliate her minutes earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on the audience. The girl who had been labeled unfit now occupied the space with natural authority, as if she had always belonged there. But the most important aspect of this project, she said, her voice ringing clear and strong through the silent auditorium, is not the financial figures or the technological innovations. It's the possibility of building bridges between worlds that today exist separated by invisible walls. Sophia gestured gently toward the audience, encompassing all the families present in her final argument. You represent the intellectual and financial capital needed to turn ideas into reality. We, from the working class neighborhoods, represent the creativity born of necessity and the deep knowledge of the problems that need solving. She paused deliberately, allowing her words to sink into the collective consciousness. When these two worlds truly collaborate, instead of simply coexisting, genuine innovation is born, and it benefits society as a whole. The final proposal was devastating in its simplicity and boldness. Sophia suggested that the school establish direct partnerships with 3 low-income communities, creating a living lab where students from different social classes would work together to develop sustainable solutions to real problems. The elite students would contribute resources and theoretical knowledge, while youth from the neighborhoods would offer practical perspectives and adaptive creativity. It was a complete inversion of the traditional charity model, proposing horizontal collaboration instead of top-down paternalism. The timer read 30 seconds when Sophia concluded with a sentence that would be etched into the memory of everyone present. I didn't come here today to ask to belong to this place. I came to propose that this place become worthy of belonging to the future we can build together." The silence that followed was unlike any other during the entire presentation. It was not the silence of embarrassment or anticipation of failure, but the profound quiet of collective recognition in the face of something genuinely extraordinary. The timer hit 0 and beeped softly, but no one in the auditorium moved. 300 people remained motionless, processing what they had just witnessed. The girl who was supposed to fail publicly had delivered a presentation that surpassed, in quality and vision, many university lectures those educated parents had attended over the course of their professional lives. Helena stood frozen at the side of the stage, her expression revealing the shock of someone whose deepest convictions had just been completely demolished by a 12-year-old child. The first sound to break the silence was a single, slow, deliberate clap. Eduardo Mendez rose from his seat and began to applaud with the solemnity of someone who recognizes genuine excellence when he sees it. Within seconds, his solitary ovation swelled into an avalanche of applause that swept across the entire auditorium. Parents who minutes earlier had expected to witness a public humiliation now stood spontaneously, clapping for a 12-year-old girl who had just delivered a masterclass on innovation, sustainability, and social inclusion. The sound echoed against the auditorium walls like thunderous waves of overdue recognition. Helena remained motionless at the side of the stage, her hands trembling slightly as she watched her academic authority crumble before 300 witnesses. For 15 years, she had built a reputation on the premise that educational excellence was a privilege of class, that a sophisticated family environment was a prerequisite for superior intellectual development. Sophia had destroyed that theory in 5 minutes, demonstrating that brilliance can be born anywhere, grow in any soil, and bloom despite any adversity. The professor felt like a general who had just lost a war she believed was impossible to lose. Marcus Oliveira, who had discreetly recorded parts of the presentation, was already running large-scale implementation possibilities in his head. 30 years of experience in the energy sector told him he had just witnessed the birth of a technological and social revolution. A revolution conceived not in the pricey labs of elite universities, but in the brilliant mind of a girl who studied at the public library because she couldn't afford the books her wealthy school deemed essential. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. Other business leaders began to approach the stage, business cards appearing as if by magic in hands, eager to connect with the young genius who had come out of nowhere to revolutionize their perspectives on innovation and social development. Sophia watched the movement with a serenity that stood in dramatic contrast to the emotional chaos that had gripped the auditorium minutes earlier. She had climbed that stage hoping to prove she deserved to be there. Now she stepped down, knowing she had proved something far greater, that the place needed her just as much as she needed the place. Principal Robert approached the microphone, his expression revealing a mix of institutional pride and personal unease. As an experienced administrator, he recognized that he had just witnessed something historic, one of those moments that define an institution's future. But he also knew he would have to deal with the political consequences of a senior teacher being publicly overruled by a scholarship student. The reverberations of those 5 minutes would extend far beyond that auditorium, reaching administrative corridors, boardroom meetings, and inevitably the headlines of education-focused media. Principal Robert gripped the microphone with hands trying to disguise a faint tremor, fully aware that his next words would be remembered for a long time in the living rooms of New York's elite. "Professor Helena," he said, his voice echoing through the auditorium still charged with the energy of Sophia's ovation, "I believe we all just witnessed a truly exceptional presentation. A demonstration of technical knowledge, rigorous research, and social vision that honors the highest academic standards of this institution." His administrative diplomacy tried to soften what everyone knew was a public accounting, but the message was clear. The wager had been made in front of 300 witnesses and needed to be honored. Helena walked onto the stage with steps that seemed to carry the weight of an entire career being publicly questioned. Her expression had evolved from initial shock to a desperate attempt at damage control. As a professor well-versed in academic politics, she knew that fully admitting defeat would be professional suicide, but she also understood that trying to deny the obvious would be even more devastating before such a sophisticated crowd. "It was certainly a surprising presentation," she began, choosing each word carefully. "But I believe there was a misunderstanding about the nature of my initial proposal. It was more of a figure of speech, a pedagogical prompt to encourage student participation." A murmur of disapproval rippled immediately through the auditorium. Eduardo Mendez stood again, his expression revealing the indignation of a businessman who had just witnessed a brazen attempt to renege on a public agreement. "Professor Helena," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who closes multi-million-dollar deals based on the strength of a pledged word, "we all heard your offer clearly. $96,000 in tuition if young Sophia impressed the audience. As a business leader present in this auditorium, I can attest that she not only impressed us, she exceeded any reasonable expectation we could have had." Other voices joined the chorus, demanding accountability. Parents who had arrived expecting cruel entertainment now became unwitting defenders of justice, united by collective indignation against someone trying to escape a publicly made promise. Helena looked around the auditorium and saw 300 faces reflecting the same silent message. Her professional credibility depended on how she handled this moment. Sophia remained on stage, watching the scene with a dignity that stood in stark contrast to the growing desperation of the person who had tried to humiliate her. The tension in the auditorium was becoming unbearable when a clear voice cut through the air, thick with expectation. "I'll pay Sophia's tuition." Eduardo Mendez walked up to the stage with the determination of someone who had just made a life-changing decision. $96,000, as promised by Professor Helena. "But I'll go further. I propose creating a scholarship fund for other young talents like Sophia." His declaration caused immediate commotion among the families present, many of them recognizing the opportunity to associate their names with a cause that had taken on heroic proportions before their eyes. Marcus Oliveira immediately stood up. "My company will contribute $200,000 to this fund." Other business leaders began to speak up spontaneously, as if participating in a high society charity auction, but with one crucial difference. This time, the money wasn't going to distant institutions, but to a cause that had touched their consciences directly and personally. $300,000 from our family," shouted a socialite in the front row. $500,000 from Mendez and Associates, announced another entrepreneur, determined not to be outdone in public generosity. Sophia watched the scene with a serenity that impressed even the most experienced adults present. At 12 years old, she instinctively understood that this moment transcended her personal story, becoming something larger, a collective awakening to issues those privileged families had ignored for decades. When Principal Robert handed her the microphone so she could speak, she did so with a wisdom far beyond what her age suggested. "I am deeply grateful for everyone's generosity," Sophia said, her voice echoing clearly through the auditorium still buzzing with financial pledges. "But I'd like to suggest that this fund not be just about money. It should be about building real bridges between worlds that currently ignore each other." She proposed that the scholarships be paired with reciprocal mentorship programs where young people from different social classes would work together on projects benefiting the whole community. "What you witnessed today wasn't extraordinary because I am special. It was extraordinary because I had the chance to show potential that exists in thousands of children who have never been seen or heard." Helena remained in the corner of the stage, witnessing her attempt at humiliation turn into an improvised social revolution. Parents who, minutes earlier, had respected her as an academic authority now ignored her completely, focused instead on the girl who had become the catalyst for their long-dormant consciences. The fund quickly reached $500,000, but more important than the money was the shift in perspective Sophia had sparked among 300 of New York's most influential families. 3 days after the presentation that shook the foundations of the International Elite Academy, the school board met in an extraordinary session. Principal Robert had spent 72 hours fielding calls from parents, education journalists, and foundation representatives eager to learn more about the Sophia Martinez phenomenon. The repercussions had gone far beyond the school walls, reaching education departments, universities, and even international development organizations that had learned of the case through videos circulating online. The board's first decision was unanimous: the creation of the Inclusive Excellence Program, designed to identify and nurture talent in low-income communities. Sophia would become the program's first student ambassador, helping select new scholarship recipients and develop practical social projects. The $500,000 fund would be managed by a joint committee, including parents, educators, and community representatives, ensuring that decisions were made democratically and transparently. Helena Cardoso was quietly removed from her role as academic coordinator, given a paid sabbatical offer everyone understood to be an elegant dismissal. She was replaced by Maria Santos, an educator with 20 years of experience in public schools and a master's degree in inclusive education. The change symbolized a profound transformation in the school's educational philosophy, privileging pedagogical competence over international academic prestige. Rosa Martinez received an offer that completely changed her professional trajectory: to leave her position as janitor and become a teaching assistant in the new program, with a salary equal to what she had earned juggling 3 jobs. The school granted her a full scholarship to pursue a degree in education at a partner university, recognizing that Sophia's mother possessed unique insights into the educational needs of low-income children. The transformation was complete. The family once tolerated as a token of social concession had become central to the mission of the city's most prestigious institution. The International Elite Academy's auditorium had been transformed completely. In the same hall where Sophia had been publicly humiliated, 20 young people from underserved communities now presented projects that rivaled university research. Each new scholarship student had been selected not only for academic merit, but also for their potential social impact and ability to build bridges between different socioeconomic realities. The program quickly became a national model, visited by educators from 12 states and 3 Latin American countries eager to replicate the experience. Sophia, now 13, occupied a unique position at the school. She was simultaneously a student, a mentor, and a consultant for the program born from her historic presentation. Her renewable energy project had been implemented in 5 different communities, generating monthly savings of $120,000 for more than 200 families. International universities had begun offering her full scholarships for when she completed high school. But Sophia kept her feet on the ground, focused on expanding the impact of her work before thinking about her own academic path. The most remarkable transformation, however, had taken place in the school's culture. Students from wealthy families, initially resistant to the presence of classmates from humble backgrounds, discovered that social diversity dramatically enriched their educational experiences. Collaborative projects between students of different classes produced creative solutions that neither group could have developed alone. The school had become a living laboratory of social innovation, where financial privilege combined with creativity born of necessity to generate real societal impact. Rosa Martinez was in her 2nd semester of education studies, continuing her role as teaching assistant while discovering talents she had unknowingly developed during years of silent observation of the school's processes. Mother and daughter had become an inseparable pair in developing methodologies to identify and nurture academic potential regardless of socioeconomic origin. The family that had once entered the school through the back door now held a central place in the educational revolution that had transformed one of New York's most conservative institutions into a model of inclusion and democratic excellence. 2.5 years after the presentation that changed her life, Sophia Martinez took the stage at the Jacob K. Javits Convention Center to deliver the closing keynote at the International Conference on Inclusive Education. At 15, she had become the youngest keynote speaker in the event's history, addressing educators from 47 countries. Her theme, Talent Has No Address, Building Bridges Between Parallel Worlds. The irony was not lost on anyone who knew her story. The girl who once didn't belong anywhere was now speaking to a global audience about belonging and social transformation. In the middle of the audience, in a discreet chair on the 10th row, sat Helena Cardoso, listening to every word with near reverence. The former professor had spent 2 years in deep personal reflection, questioning decades of academic biases she once believed to be scientific, discovering that her international degrees had not prepared her to recognize brilliance when it came wrapped in humble origins. She now worked as a volunteer in 3 different social projects, using her educational expertise to identify and develop talents in communities she had once ignored completely. When Sophia finished her speech to a 5-minute standing ovation, Helena approached the speaker's area. The encounter was tense at first, heavy with painful memories, but Sophia showed the same maturity that had once impressed 300 families in that school auditorium years earlier. "Professor Helena," she said, extending her hand with a genuine smile, "thank you for giving me the chance to prove I belonged in that place. Without your challenge, I might never have found the courage to show my potential." The reconciliation was complete when Helena offered a public apology, acknowledging that Sophia had been her greatest teacher on the dangers of educational prejudice. Together, They announced a partnership to develop methodologies for identifying talent that transcended socioeconomic barriers, turning a painful past experience into a tool for future social change. Sophia's final sentence at that international conference echoed through the halls long afterward. We should not fight to belong to places that reject us. We should transform those places into spaces worthy of our shared humanity. She had proven, once and for all, that talent has no social class, but that the opportunity to develop it should be the universal right of every child, regardless of the address where they were born.